Welcome everyone to this series, Leaders I Love, and I have a fascinating leader with me today, Kate Billing, who is a thought leader who heads up, and I suppose we could say is creator of the Fully Human movement. And you do this from your platform as co-founder of Blacksmith, which is a leadership development practice that is all about forging better leaders, not just for today, but for our future, or not just for our future, but for today. Either way you look at it, things have changed massively and drastically lately. So I'm going to be really fascinated to talk with you about that. And I would say, from my perspective, you are a rule breaker and a change maker, and you've been highly visible and vocal with your models and your content and the experience that you have been providing people through COVID, which is what makes you a leader who I love. And so I've invited you to be here with me today. Thank you so much for sharing your time.
Pleasure. Absolute pleasure, Tui.
I would really love to dive into some of these models that I just referred to, because you have been prolific at creating models and they've all been interesting, but there have been a few in particular that have stood out to me and been really helpful for me personally in terms of, I suppose, making sense of and creating meaning around the experience that I and so many of us have been having. So I'd love it if you could share perhaps one of your favorite models, or the one that has helped you the most through these last few weeks.
Sure thing. Well, I suppose a bit of context really around the models thing is that I used to consider myself what I call model blocked. I was great with words, but not so great with pictures. And I had a story, a particularly unhelpful story, that I wasn't very creative, which of course is absolute tosh. But it has been really interesting in the last year or so, just starting to play with using models, because I'm a visual thinker and do think in pictures and colour and snapshots and video and ideas and everything else. I thought, well, I'm just going to use it, particularly through the COVID situation. I thought I would use the practice of creating models as a way to explore my experience and make meaning of my own experience in a way that might be helpful for others, really. So that was kind of the genesis of it. I'd been doing it anyway, but then it was like, oh, actually, we've got quite a lot of material here. So I thought I would, Host has disabled attendee screen sharing. If you let me screen share, love.
How do we do that?
I can put one up. If you go down the bottom to screen share.
Multiple. There you go. I've said multiple participants can share. Does that work?
Brilliant. Well, that's the other thing we've all learned how to do, is use Zoom.
Absolutely.
So this one is one, this is about, there were a couple of versions before it came together as this, and working title, The COVID Rollercoaster, because it's actually, even though it's two-dimensional here, it's three-dimensional, which is part of what I explored in a recent blog about discouragement, so the dip of discouragement. And I have found this one particularly helpful because it's, rather than thinking of something as this experience of being in stages, it really allowed me to capture for myself, and seemingly for other people for whom it's resonated, this experience of there's a momentum and a sense of, like in the dip of discouragement, there's a feeling of momentum and a sense of gravity and falling kind of forward and down into chaos, out of this optimistic, light-filled, possibility-filled kind of reality of the opportunities in the current situation, into, oh, holy shit. Maybe it's, it goes from that dip has a layer at the top called doubt. So it's just the sort of dip of doubt, 3 Ds in the dip, which is like, oh God, I'm just not sure. Maybe not. Oh. Whereas discouragement is actually, I've taken a knock either from my own head or from something in the context, or something someone has said in response to me putting my creative idea, my energy, myself out there. now I'm losing momentum, enthusiasm, and energy for the work, and dropping rather than falling forward. So there's a physical sense that comes to me with these things that's a bit different. Doubt's just a little dip, whereas discouragement is like warmth. There's a bit more of almost visceral physical sensation to it. And below that is despair. And despair, as I mentioned in the article recently, Viktor Frankl talked about being suffering being, despair being suffering without meaning, like not there being seemingly no purpose in our suffering. And I think a lot of people, especially in the early days of the COVID rollercoaster, that was a place we all were, particularly if, like us, everything disappeared out of your calendar and out of your bank account potential in a matter of days. It's like, what's going on here? Where are we going? And so this is what leads to that chaotic kind of reality in the system of saying, I don't know which way is up. The things that used to give me a sense of groundedness and structure and identity are up for grabs or are dissolving, have been shown to not hold much water anymore or been tested. And then it's sort of moving back around by taking action, and I talk about this in how to approach discouragement, by taking action, by examining one's experience and beliefs, by looking to people outside ourselves who demonstrate what we feel we're missing, and reaching out to those people and acknowledging that. Just by actually giving encouragement to others, we can feel more encouraged, and that kind of helps you come around. Helps you come around the corner into control, sort of flattening out a bit, not feeling quite so much in the dip or chaos, and flattening out as things begin to feel more optimistic and possibility filled, which builds our confidence and therefore our ability to be more creative, whether that's creative in terms of our own lives and how we're showing up every day, or creative, like literally in terms of how we're reinventing our businesses or ourselves. Yeah, so that's the one that's been most helpful for me.
I love that, and I'm sure it's probably not no surprise. It's probably very intentional that you have created it as a sideways infinity symbol, because of course the sideways figure 8 means infinity, which to me talks to infinite possibilities. Yeah,
and flow. So there is a sense of energy, like I said, rather than it kind of being staged or even though I can call them phases if you like, you can't kind of get off it, even though we'd quite like to sometimes.
Yeah.
This is true. I'm a bit of a science nerd, and when you think about it, even looking at physics and stuff like that, for every force there is an equal and opposite one, and there is this light and shadow, there is the sense of flow and movement and energy in all things and in all people, and it is the story we tell ourselves about our experience, the support we have around us, and our ability to be more present to our own experience in a kind of neutral way. That whole idea of we're always going to put judgment on stuff in the first place, because that's just what humans do. We're natural categorizers. We say it's good or bad. This feels either a bad experience and maybe I'm a bad person, or it's never going to get any better, But it's the ability to recognize that one is doing that. And I find that mental models of any kind, whether they're kind of graphic ones like this or they're metaphors that help us make sense of, get a bit of space and make a little bit of peace with whatever we're experiencing, allow us to move forward more powerfully and with more insight, rather than thrash around in the unknowingness, if you like, in the chaos, the darkness.
Absolutely. And I think also what they allow us to do is connect more to you talked about, exploring beliefs as part of, moving through the flow of this model. It allows us the space to connect to and explore our beliefs. And I suppose almost in the flow of it and in reverse, your beliefs, your personal beliefs and values have probably shaped this model and the other models that you've produced. So I'd love to see your full face again. And I'd love for you to share with us a few of your core values, or maybe a favourite belief that you have that has provided you not only direction and stability and hope in this time, but perhaps has also fueled your creativity in producing these models.
Yeah, and I think it's partly about, it's not just the models, it's what's showing up in terms of building confidence for other things. This is the thing about disciplined creative practice. It is a mind shifter, and if it's a mind shifter, it's a reality shifter. And I think from a couple of beliefs perspective, things which have stood me in good stead in the past, and which I have been leaning on in the past 8 weeks in particular, two fundamental beliefs. One of them is that everything is always working out, especially when it feels like it isn't. Yeah. It's always on the way to being better, no matter how long that loop might be, and no matter where on it you are, it's on the way to better. Yeah. And better might be closer. And I think this is another thing, it's not about, I think, perfectionism and the need to be right and all of the things that go along with that in terms of our sense of value and place in the world, particularly when, as you and I do, we work for ourselves. And what we put into the world is us and our thinking and our ideas and our beliefs and our identity. That's a lot of vulnerability. And so one of the other beliefs for me that I find really helpful is that I am right here, right now, and I decide. And it's a real creator consciousness belief of being grounded in the moment. I am right here, right now, being in my body in this moment, no matter how it might feel, allowing myself to experience that. And in that place, I get to decide how I think, how I feel, and what I do in this moment. And it looks, I'm a mad Viktor Frankl fan. Yeah. And, his saying about, no matter and I'm going to butcher it because I just can't remember all of it at the moment, but basically, no matter what the circumstance in which we find ourselves, the one thing every human being can do is choose the story we tell ourselves, our mindset, and how we face into and respond to those circumstances. Yeah. And that is why I think this responsibility for understanding how we are as human beings, individually and collectively, is so important and so powerful. Becoming conscious to yourself and the light and shadow of humanity, but also like fundamental things about how does this work? How does this work? This my time traveling suit that I'm, rocking around in. How does it all work? How can I make sure that this engine room is set up so that I can decide really powerfully in those moments? So yeah, those are two. Everything's always working out, especially when it feels like it isn't. Yeah. And I am right here, right now, and I decide.
Yeah. And I love the word that you added to the I decide as you went into it and described it. You said, I get to decide, as opposed to I have to decide. And I think that's really powerful. It's such a powerful reframing. We are all in chaos. We've all been disrupted, and we have had to make some big decisions and often some tough decisions. But if we can reframe it to, I get to decide, that gives agency, it gives ownership to the power that we all have within us. And, we do have the power to step into great potential if we choose to believe that it's there. And your first belief really is about looking forward to the future, which is hopeful. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about hope, because I know that Blacksmith is focused on the potential for business to be a force for good in the world, which is, a really hopeful ideal. And in a time when the world is in chaos, we need hope more than ever. And I think I mentioned to you when I emailed you, the Gallup organization has put out some research. In fact, I think it might be, over the last 10 years, they've been looking at this, and they re-released it through COVID, saying that the 4 qualities people look for in leaders in times of crisis are stability, compassion, trust, and hope. So hope is critical for us in this time. So I'd love it if you could tell us more about the good you're seeing from businesses and other leaders in COVID.
Yeah, it's just such an incredible opportunity and responsibility. And I think further to your point about agency, as a humanist, the capacity and responsibility of humans to both create and solve our own problems is something I believe in. Nobody's going to save us but ourselves. And when I look at the challenges there are around local, regional, global government and governance, and the complexity of the world, and globalization versus local sovereignty, all of that stuff. One of the power tools that we have in terms of creating positive systemic change on the planet is business and capitalism in particular, and the practice of it, and how it, its genesis in terms of the merchant class and everything way back in time kind of got a little bit twisted over the last couple of 100 years, even though it's exploded. And it has, the last 200 years, we've seen more people get lifted out of extreme poverty than at any other time in human history. There's a lot of great stuff. It's really, despite the current situation, a fantastic time to be alive. There's a brilliant book called Factfulness, which I encourage people to read. And so capitalism and the practice of business is just so prevalent and pervasive. It drives our economies in a lot of ways. It drives our society in terms of sustainability of employment conditions, supply chain, and the conscious, and sustainable production of product. There's a whole lot of stuff which I think where there's always been this opportunity to be better and do better, particularly when we look at, global population is past 7.7 million now, on the way to 9.5 billion where they think it'll top out, but could go as high as 11. And the way we are living, and in particular the way we are producing products and services and moving ourselves from where we live to where we work, and all of these things are contributing to large-scale problems, systemic problems that we have, be they economic, environmental, social, whatever. And so I think what I'm seeing in terms of the current context and the opportunities for leaders to really step up, to be reshaping their businesses, to be doing right by all of their stakeholders, the planet, their people, their customers, the communities in which they operate. I think it's still really early days, to be honest. I think there's just been a lot of crisis. I think we're coming through the crisis. I think this is where we need to be careful about the language that we use. We are getting into, we're definitely through the hammer, and now we're into the dance. And so what I am seeing that is really good is businesses prioritising their organisational purpose, if they have one, and using that as a galvanising point and an anchor point for all of the decisions that they are making, deploying their values in the same way, and saying, how do we do right by our people, all of our stakeholders, etc., in line with this, whilst still making commercially and strategically sensible decisions. Because what matters, the biggest social responsibility endeavour a business can have is be a good business and be around for a long time, employ people, pay tax. that's kind of start. Do your business right. So I see them putting purpose and values at the centre, coming back to that. Brilliant example of Brian Chesky from Airbnb, and recently, in fact, last week, and I shared his letter on LinkedIn that went out to all 7,900 Airbnb staff. The most ethically grounded, compassionate, strategic, yet human communication about a restructure and the organisation's response to it that I've seen, a masterclass. And I think that's the other thing, is around the sustainability of employment for people. People are taking the government's offering of the wage subsidy very seriously as a support for them to keep their people, as many of their people, employed as they can while the system works itself out and they work out whether they still have a business or not. I see people setting aside previously held beliefs they might have had about working in remotely or working in what we like to call distributed teams, hearing from organisations where senior leaders might have been, no, this is not going to work, and they've had a complete shifting experience where they're now going, actually, I get it. I get how maybe the way we've been doing business isn't going to get the best out of our people. Maybe there's another way. I see a lot of, but there's a light and shadow to it. A lot of people being really open to possibility and other people clinging to the old paradigm because it provides them with certainty or a sense of retained power and control. Some people are holding it with an open hand, others are holding on tightly. So it's interesting to see what's emerging, and I think the biggest opportunities are ahead of us yet.
Absolutely. And you're so right to say it's early days. It's very early days. But if we can stop and pause and reflect on and talk about and share the good that we are seeing, and so much of the good, as you've said, is at the level of values, of purpose, and it is at the level of people, not necessarily systems. Although, as you've said, so many businesses, yours being one of them, has had to look at its system, its way of working and operating, and instantly, almost overnight, reshape itself. So there is a lot that's going on, but there is a lot of good, and one thing that I'm seeing is just so much generosity between and among people, within their own teams, between teams, nationally and internationally. I think it's a really hard time, but it's also a really encouraging time to see the good that's out there and the generosity.
Yeah, for sure.
And I think, if we bring it back to you, which really this series is about getting to the heart of leaders, you are one of those people who has had to, step up instantly, almost overnight, and reshape your business because you were out there, hosting workshops, facilitating, leading people and teams face to face, and you've done that, and it can't have been easy necessarily. So what I'd love to ask you is, what practices or rituals did you have that allowed you to, I suppose, find a sense of steadiness amongst all of the uncertainty and chaos? I know you've shared that model, but in terms of personal practices that you have.
Sure. I'm a mad fan of the morning and end of day routines. So bookending my day around very particular practices. And I also, one of the fundamentals is prioritizing sleep. If you look at performance in any area, the creative arts, business, sport, the number one thing around performance and our ability to do whatever it is that is contained within that bucket of performance, regardless of the area in our jobs, is recovery, and the number one thing is rest, sleep. Yeah. Particularly when we stress, our adrenal systems are buggered up by this. So I have been, and your morning routine starts with your end of day routine the night before. So I maintain a rigorous kind of adherence to bedtime and wake time. So I get away from devices, away from TV, and start my wind down routine at 8:30 at night. And that includes being in a low light environment, takes about half an hour of just getting into a state of being ready for bed and leaving stuff behind. My husband and I are in business together, so one of the things we do is don't talk about money after dinner.
Yeah.
No matter how big the
Great.
situation is, because talk about money after dinner gets you stressed. So that and journaling, and I read two pages of a book, because that's about all I can deal with, and then I'm asleep. And I wake up at 5 o'clock or before. So I have an alarm that goes off at 5 or before, and then I get up. I spend half an hour outside in silence, no matter the weather.
Wow.
Just me and nature and whatever's going on. It's just I have 2 hours of silence in the morning. Get up before the rest of the house, kind of thing. And so I do that, and then I journal and I meditate, and then I read. So, or draw models. So I'm I read. What I tend to do when I'm reading in the morning is it's about more professional kind of reading, things that are really inspiring stuff, and I make notes and I doodle and that sort of thing. So I think what that means is that I'm connected to the world outside myself and the world outside my computer. I'm well rested. I'm present with my mind, and you have made me a lovely personalised, highly recommend to these custom meditations people, get amongst it. My intention meditation, which I do every Monday morning. Awesome. So I'm present, I'm setting myself up, and I'm also every day thinking. I do what's called a weekly plan and a daily scan on my diary. So I set it up. I'm always thinking a week ahead, but every day I'm checking in at the beginning of the day and saying, are these people, are these tasks the best use of my time in this moment? Yeah. So I think there are lots of other things, but I think having a good end of day calm down and a good beginning of the day, getting present to yourself, the world, your thinking, and moving into action and staying away from social media.
Yeah. Yes. Oh my gosh, that is the challenge. Thank you for sharing so much of that. I think, well, from my perspective and observation, I often look at, the content that you're putting out there, and I think, oh my God, she must just work all the hours God gives. So to hear you say that you actually start the wind down process at 8:30 is like, wow. I mean, obviously you're getting up early, but I think it's of huge value, and thank you for sharing, so much of that detail, because I think it's quite inspiring for people to think that, I actually could shut down early. Of course we should be, it's good for us, but the permission factor that actually you don't need to be online and be doing it all hours, and in fact it's not productive. We do kind of know that, but to hear from people like you, I think that gives a sense of permission, so thanks for that.
Pleasure.
Now, question for you, what do you think is the most powerful potential that you think leaders have that is untapped right now and can be harnessed right now?
Courage. I really do. I think courage is important. The courage to be vulnerable, the courage to practice humility and not have to have the answers, and to create space for your teams, your partners, your suppliers. I don't like that word, but the partners you have, and making stuff real in the world, to be, if you don't have the answers, and you can't have all the answers because this is a rapidly emerging complex system and nobody knows what's going on, we're all making it up. Yeah. So the courage to be vulnerable, the courage to not know, the courage to ask, the courage to, if you have, to challenge the old paradigm which no longer serves, the courage to say, what if, and I wonder, and ask why a lot of yourself and other people, because I think all of those are courageous actions. Because courage is what it's going to take to really and truly make it through, not just make it through, without going down a rabbit hole. We have an opportunity to be anti-fragile, and that's not just resilient, but to actually become better and stronger as people, as teams, as organisations, as a country, as a planet through this. But it will take courage.
Mm. What do you think is standing in the way of people accessing their courage?
Fear. I mean, and fear of fill in the blank.
Mm.
Fear of getting it wrong. So I
Mm.
think that's a massive one. Fear of being visible and being seen, and maybe being seen not as you think people want you to be. I have a saying, it's fly your freak flag. It's fly your freak flag. Find it, you put it in a box somewhere in the back of the attic years ago, and then you put on a normal, predictable, everyone will accept this version of me suit.
Yeah.
Take it off, go find the freak flag, tie it around your neck, get out, get amongst it, because we're all weird, right? And this is the time for weirdness. So I think this fear of judgment, fear of getting it wrong, fear of being visible and being seen. Lots of people like to hide. I used to be one of them. It's fear of fill in the blank. But that's what courage is. It's understanding that and acting anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love what Brené Brown says, which is that you can feel fear and be brave at the same time. Being brave and having courage doesn't mean that you don't have fear. It's not like you have the fear, then you get over it, and then you are brave. You can absolutely feel both of them at the same time. And so I think, for those of us who are feeling a sense of fear at the moment, we can accept and embrace that and know that it is human to feel that way, and it is also human to connect to our heart. And of course the word courage comes from the word heart. So if we can connect to our heart and connect to each other and each other's hearts, we can be brave together. And I think that's so much of what we are doing and what we need to do as we move forward. Would you agree?
Yeah, totally. And it is the we're in it together. I think this is part of the thing, as you say, moving forward together. We are better together when we bring, and there's, this idea in leadership that the best of me shows up when the best of you does, as a follower to a leader. So it's always having the courage to do the work and show up as the best of yourself to inspire the best in others.
Yeah.
And there are lots of words around courage, like you mentioned, brave. One that I feel particularly this year, even before the situation, is daring. And I like daring because even when I say it, it puts a smile on my face.
Yeah.
It's like daring is courage with a little bit of mischief and a little bit of play and a little bit of like, I dare you, I dare myself. Oh my God, I just did that. It's like I feel like there's a real heaviness often about the conversations we're having, like keeping labeling it a crisis and everything else. It's like, this is, yes, shit got real and it's not fun. And there are a lot of people in suffering. Yeah. So one of the metaphors I have for this experience is like a forest fire, and that has just blown through and destroyed a whole lot of what was our, reality, life in the forest. It's gone. It's in ashes. What happens after that is that the forest regenerates and grows stronger and new life takes over and that kind of thing. And I just think there's so much, when I'm not in the dip of discouragement and the chaotic bit, I'm spending more time on the other thing. I think coming round, it requires us to hold it lightly, rather than to be holding on tightly in the darkness and struggle of the story that this is crisis. Because yes, it is, but is labouring that useful? Yeah. It helps sometimes to say we acknowledge that, and it's not one or the other. We can say that this is terrible, and we can say there is opportunity and possibility and daring in this moment. What will I do with that? That means we leapfrog over the linear path we were on before. We actually have an opportunity in this recovery to maybe do what might have taken us 3 to 5 years before and do it in 18 months. Do it in 2 years.
100%. And I so agree with you on the language side of things. As soon as we as a country called level 4 lockdown, I immediately turned to my children and my family and said, actually, we're calling it a home retreat because we're retreating from work and school. And actually, it's going to feel really lovely here. Here are all the things that we're going to do at home. And like, it just completely changed not just our mindset and our outlook, but actually changed how we carried ourselves through each day. So I agree with you, language is so important. And I love daring. I think daring comes for me with a sense of thrill and kind of like an energy and a bit of a kind of vibration to it. And I think there's a challenge to it. So I'm not surprised you use it because you are a natural challenger. And so to finish us off, I would love to ask you if there is a challenge that you would like to lay down to leaders who are watching this.
So I think it is about leading, like doing the work to understand what it is to be human in their own experience, and to, from that place of deep understanding, and when I say be human, I mean like how your brain works, how, you know, human motivation at a neurobiological level, all of these things, like really, really understand what it is to be human, because then you will do better. You will be able to engage with your people. And when I say people, I mean anybody around you, people at home, at work, in your community, at your executive team. You will be able to understand them at a deeper level and practice leadership with a greater amount of compassion / courage, because they come together very powerfully. Compassion isn't soft, and compassion's gritty. It's action based. So yeah, that would be my thing. Do the work to understand what it is to be human, to be you, what is going on for all of the humans around you, and how that understanding will help you to be better in life, leadership, and business.
Absolutely. Good point about compassion. I think compassion means to suffer with, and we can't move through another person's suffering or be empathetic towards them unless we understand ourselves. And so what you're saying is entirely relevant, appropriate, and so important. And I think, you know, I've heard people talk about, I'll say the word again, talk about this crisis as the great pause. And I prefer that, because although many of us have been, you know, kind of rushing madly to reshape our business models and kind of keep our people and all the rest of it, it has been to a certain extent a pause. And even though in New Zealand here we're moving into level 2 and beyond, I think if we can take with us the sense of pause, and I suppose what I'm really thinking is intentional, as you say, conscious living, conscious working, a sense of intention with us, then we will all be, as you say, better, and we can have that hope for the future and all the opportunity that it brings us. So thank you so much for sharing so much of your time and of yourself, and for doing all that you do and for being all that you are.
Thank you very much, Tui, and big ups to you for the work you're doing, and for initiating this series, and for your support of all of the people in your world. You know, I am a firm believer that changing the world is a team sport, and we all have our parts to play, and I'm really grateful that you're doing yours, so thank you.
Thank you, that's so kind. Thank you so much. You have a great evening.